Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back for another round of Going Mental. I'm Paul Elam. I think I'm Paul Elam. I could be called Elam, but then you probably would, and that would be bad. So I'll just stick with Paul Elam, and I am with, as usual, the ever wonderful Dr. Tara Pomatier. You want to say hi to everybody, Dr. T?
Hi, everybody. We're having a special guest who just decided to.
Okay, well, wouldn't be the first bitch we've talked about on this show. Listen, let's sum it up in one word. HOAs. We're going to talk about HOAs tonight. We're going to talk about HOAs and hookers and titty dancers and hairdressers and a few professions that generally conventional wisdom, and I'm going to say from the outset, there is nothing empirical about this whatsoever. This is, for me at least, anecdotally evident. I also want to say very clearly that I recognize very much that there are many women engaged in the sex industry, sex workers that are normal, functional, reliable, decent, moral human beings. I have no qualms with them whatsoever, but I am sure that most, if not all of them, would tell you that that profession, particularly where it is practiced illegally, attracts a whole bunch of people that aren't quite so normal and quite so honorable. And I don't know what the deal is with hairdressers. Why don't we start with that, Dr. T, before we get to the nuts and bolts of the other professions? But what is it with hairdressers that the profession seems to attract borderlines like free cocaine?
Well, I can speculate, but of course, again, it's anecdotal and has not been. My theories have not been borne out by scientific methodology or research. According to my hair guy, a lot of people who enter that profession were not necessarily attractive as children, or became obsessed with beauty in the beauty industry, and he won't date within his own profession anymore. He rules out hairdressers because he happens to be of the same mind as you. I'm not sure exactly why. Again, I've had hairstylists over the years who are perfectly lovely, stable people, but I do think there is something about the entertainment and beauty industries, and I include exotic dancing in that as well, that does appeal to a certain kind of individual who is desperate for attention, validation, for eyes to be on him or her, who craves that, and they turn to entertainment, or, like I said, exotic dancing, which I guess is a form of entertainment, doesn't do anything for me, to get that. So, instead of feeling good about themselves from within, they're constantly seeking that external validation. I think also, and I think there is research that demonstrates this, that for many individuals who enter prostitution, stripping, pornography, there is a higher incidence of, say, childhood sexual abuse and trauma than the general population. And I would argue also a higher percentage of personality disorders that enter into those professions in the general population. And one of the reasons I suggested this topic this evening, because, as you know, occasionally in my practice, there seem to be, I get clusters of people with the same issues going on at the same time. And this isn't the first time it's happened, but it happened in recent weeks to work with a handful of gentlemen who are recovering and healing from some pretty traumatic relationships with 2 strippers, 1 phone sex working, what do they call it, phone sex operator?
Oh, it sounds like a good a name as any to me.
and a prostitute. Or she was actually saying it wasn't prostitution. She was going onto those sugar baby sites for women
Oh,
looking for sugar daddies, which just seems like a genteel way of saying prostitution.
okay, well, let me hit you with a story, and let's see what we can make of it. Because again, you know, there's always it takes two to tango, and people don't end up with these individuals by themselves. Well, actually, I'll tell you two stories. One is that we used to be able to predict with relative certainty. Again, this is not scientific by any means, but in one of the facilities I used to work at as a counselor, we had a nursing office with big, like, bay windows in front of it that looked all the way through the grounds, and you could see the administration building where intake was done. So every time we got a new client, they would come out of that administration building and they would take the long walk, as it were, to the nursing station where they were introduced and assigned residence areas and things like that. We began the physical orientation to the campus. When there was an exceptionally, every time an exceptionally attractive woman came around that corner and started walking toward that, we were like, okay, what club did she dance at? You know, what movie was she in? And we were right every time. It was, and so I think there's a part of, and of course there was also dual diagnosis most of the time. There's some sort of personality disorder associated with that. But I mean, knowing there was an alcohol problem from 100 yards away, you could tell there was a personality disorder, and you could tell they were involved in the sex industry in one way or another.
That's not surprising. Typically, what I see with the men I work with who get involved with this type is it typically starts off as a rescue mission. Oh, this poor woman, she had such a horrible childhood, such a hard life. She doesn't want to do this. I'm going to give her. I'm going to help her out. I'm going to help her get out of that strip club, or bordello sounds like a very Victorian era word. I don't want to use that.
Whorehouse.
We talked about not using that type of language.
Well, I mean, it's.
But no, whorehouse, yeah, and so it starts off that way, and that they're going to. It's sort of like the knight in shining armor on steroids, right? This isn't just. This is somebody who, I'm sorry, the equivalent for a woman would be like saying, yes, I know he's a raging heroin addict right now, but I'm going to nurse him back to health. That's a choice, and you can certainly do that, but you're playing with fire, and the odds are not good of that happening. So these guys go off on these hero quests with these women, and what I've seen happen in every case is they just have their lives upended, their self-esteem trashed. They are often financially devastated by these individuals, because if you want to keep them off the pole, you have to keep that money flowing in. And
Or at least if you want to delimit them to just one.
well, but even more, I can't think of a single case in which one of the guys I've worked with who've been with, somebody who is in that profession, where they weren't cheated on multiple times during the course of their relationship. And contrary to what some of these exotic dancers et al. Believe, cheating with women still counts. It does.
Let me ask you about something else along those lines too. Now, I've run across that, and I've talked to many men who made it a habit to frequent those clubs and to try their hand at picking those women up, and to go through that. And for a lot of them, I agree. There were guys, and they do this with prostitutes too. They have some sort of minor messiah complex where they want to be the one that that steps into her life and heals things up and makes a good, decent, proper woman out of her and take care of her. I know those guys are there, but I have to admit, I also talked to a lot of other guys that were like, of the mentality, well, if she's hot enough to get up in front of a bunch of guys and they're howling for her to come over so they can stick a dollar bill in her G-string, then she's hot enough to feed my ego. She makes me feel like I must be some sort of, Casanova or something to be able to score on this level. So in all fairness, I don't think the motivations of all these guys were simply to rescue the damsel in distress.
No, and I get those guys on my caseload too, but they don't stay for very long because, in my opinion, many of them, if not full-blown narcissists, have enough narcissistic traits that working with me for any length of time becomes an uncomfortable proposition because I hold their feet to the fire and the accountability is big with me. So yes, they also attract those guys who are going to see it as like they've got some sort of sexual curiosity, and aren't they these virile men for being able to score somebody who has sex for money? I don't see the maybe I don't get it, but I don't see the what's the word? I don't see how that's a trophy. They don't.
Well, no, I think I've had a laugh at that, which sort of reminds me of the other little vignette that I wanted to pass your way. We had some medical equipment while Stacy's dad was still alive, delivered out to his home, his final days of care, and the guy brought in the hospital bed and was setting it up, and we just struck up a conversation. And this was a guy, he was quite a bit younger than me. He was in his mid-30s, good-looking fellow, walked with some pride, worked hard, took care of himself, but he started talking just openly about his relationships, and he had just come out of something a few months prior to that with an exotic dancer, and she had he didn't know she was addicted to cocaine, and she ended up cleaning out his bank account. She talked him into writing a blank check, which he did. She cleaned out his bank account, and while he was at work, moved all of his furniture out, stole everything that he had, and was down the road. And I asked him, man, because he talked about it very casually. I said, I'd been pissed. He said, well, she was in a bad place, and I guess, it's not like it's just stuff, so no big deal. And I said, okay. And then he starts telling me about the exotic dancer that he's just met and how different she is than all the others. And I couldn't help it. I mean, this guy was there. He was doing something that needed to be done. But I eventually had to say, what are you, fucking crazy? What's wrong with you? He says, no, you don't understand. These girls are really nice. They're good human beings. And I'm not arguing that there's maybe a lot of dancers that are good human beings. But there seemed to be something bordering some kind of serious learning disability in this guy, because he was oblivious to the fact that he was headed in the same exact direction. I'm sure there was a time he thought the first one.
Over and over again to see if it's still hot.
What's up with that shit?
Some people don't learn. Some people just never learn. It's great that he could be such a forgiving, good sport about it, but to me, that's just willful self-destruction.
Is it possible, Dr. T, that when you're talking about somebody like this guy, and I know he's not the average guy, most guys don't date women that work in topless clubs. There is some that do, but just out of this guy in particular, does it seem like this is the kind of individual that just really doesn't have the capacity for any kind of meaningful relationship? Because you really can't be expecting a meaningful relationship out of a topless bar.
Well, you know, for the guy who does that over and over and over again, I would say yes, there probably is there's something going on there. I don't, you know, possibly going back to childhood. Maybe he was his mother's little knight in shining armor rescuer. Many of the men I work with who found themselves in that predicament at least one time certainly have issues going back to childhood, typically with their mother, perhaps even a father figure who groomed them to be doormats and to be taken advantage of and to be exploited. And this is where I'll challenge the men I work with, where they're saying, well, you know, all I wanted was to be in a loving relationship and have somebody who was going to love me for me and be monogamous and maybe have a family someday. And it's like, so you dated within a strip club? Like there's something, and again, yes, I am sure somewhere there are emotionally well-adjusted, stable porno actors and actresses and strippers, etc. But I'm going to say it, I think they're probably the exception instead of the rule. Okay.
Why is that? What is the difference? Are we being sexist here? I mean, if a guy, would you have the same feelings that if a guy were into porn, or if he were somehow involved working in the sex industry, would you feel like that he's a better bet for a relationship than a woman along the same lines?
I wouldn't get near that with a 10-foot penicillin-coated pole and a dart gun full of Prozac. No freaking way. No. Well, unless I was looking for you know, a thrill. Oh, 8. Okay, sorry. Not jealousy. Lucy, quit deviling Shotzi. Stop it. Stop it. We're going to have dog fighting tonight.
All right. Gentlemen, you can place your bets at avoiceformen.com.
Stop it.
Next week, roosters.
Oh, God, no. I completely lost my train of thought. I said something about, well, look, oh, yeah, I know what I was going to say. Look, if I were looking for, like, a novelty thrill, roll in the hay, which I'm not, then, yeah, maybe I'd consider that. But then, you know, my intellect would kick in and my risk assessment faculties would kick in and say, probably not a good idea, because even if I use protection, you know, if this person does happen to be mentally unbalanced, I could end up with a stalker or worse. So no, I don't think it makes a difference. I don't think it makes a difference whether the person is a man or a woman. I think if you see selling your body for sex, and again, not across the board. Like I said, I'm sure there are well-adjusted folks who do these kinds of professions. But I think by and large, it attracts a very damaged subpopulation. And if what you are looking for is a stable, loving, monogamous relationship, okay, maybe you'll find it within those groups, within those populations, but I think you have a better chance of finding that elsewhere.
Though your chances are really slim in most places, I'm afraid. I think that's why I don't want to be too hard on people in those professions, because I've had to deal with men who got ripped off and ruined. They met her in church, and it ended up, you know.
There are women who are school teachers and nurses and hope, you know, single moms, coaches, bus drivers who will mess you up every bit as much.
Let me ask you a question again about the men, because I really, the sort of difference I was trying to get at is that, you know, I've talked in the course of my work, obviously drug addicts and stuff. I talked to a lot of prostitutes and dancers that got into that scene. And almost to a single one, I don't remember that I ever actually talked to any single one of them that didn't at least claim some sort of sexual abuse in her history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is quite common in those professions that you're going to have a history of some sort of, sexual abuse, a lot of times out of family lines.
And
But
and a
what
lot
about,
of a lot of substance abuse and addiction. I mean,
sure,
oftentimes the people who go into those fields do that so they can maintain their addiction. A lot of the
yes,
people
that
go
that
into
happens
fields of
too.
addiction in order to be able to do what they're doing.
But is there anything, do you think, about the motivation that's different with men that get in these fields? I mean, I'm going to be frank. There might have been a time in my life when if somebody said, hey, Paul, we'll pay you a big stack of money to go over there and have sex with all these beautiful women, it would have at least crossed my mind to do it, and I was not sexually abused. And so I wonder for the men if the motivations.
Well, I think you're talking about it. That's a fantasy because let's get real. I'm assuming most of the Johns aren't looking like Brad Pitt or
Right.
Richard Gere, or I mean, we're not talking Julia Roberts and Richard Gere here, okay?
Okay, yeah, and I must point out that I was never offered that deal. But I still wondered if the
It's still
motivation, the background.
it happened.
I'm not going to go near that.
For a huge success, it might not. It might happen.
You never know. But I just wondered if there might have been there's a different set of motivations for men to get into those fields than women. Often, I am going to guess it's not driven by abuse, it's not driven by drug addiction, but by sexual opportunity. And I would
Believe that.
also,
I
huh?
don't believe that. I think it's.
Okay.
I would need research, but I would, without knowing for certain right now, I would be willing to bet the psychological backgrounds of men who become prostitutes, exotic dancers, etc. There are probably similar underpinnings for doing so.
Okay, well, tell you what, Ron Jeremy, if you're out there, please send me a line. I want to hear your story. Maybe you'll come on the show and talk about it. But it would be curious to find out.
You can do that show, indeed.
I think Tara's going to be absent that night. It'll just be me and Ron. But anyway, we're laughing about this, but the fact of the matter is, I've seen a lot of men go through relationships with women that were sex workers, that were involved some way in selling sexuality in order to make ends meet in life, in order to make a living. And and I'm not saying it's never happened, but I tell you what, I've seen a whole lot of nightmares come out of that, and I mean really disastrous nightmares. Look at Crystal Gail Mangle. She ended up murdering, or the accuser in the Duke Lacrosse case. For those who don't remember, Crystal Gail Mangle was an adult entertainer, and she falsely accused a bunch of guys of raping her. Of course, they slapped her on the head and said, please don't do that again. We spent several $1,000,000, and these 4 young men were dragged through the mud and had their young lives and educations ruined because of you. So we're going to punish you real harshly by saying don't do that again. Well, she ended up committing arson and murdering her boyfriend. I'm not going to say, look, folks, I'm not saying that all dancers are like Crystal Gayle, but I'm saying that is one example of the type of trouble that can happen from becoming involved. At least this one guy we know of ended up dead. And so I have to wonder a lot about the nature of the attraction. What is it about women in the sex industry that makes them magnets for a lot of guys who want long-term permanent relations with them? It strikes me as becoming a part of a prison fan club, of like trying to get at something you're never going to get. Um,
Well, and if at least with the guys I work with, we're talking about many of them had extremely abusive mothers and or fathers. And so when they say, I want to be in a loving, monogamous, stable, healthy relationship, well, first of all, many of them don't even have a template for what that's going to look like. And I examine what their actual belief systems are about relationships and love. And they believe love is supposed to hurt. And you're supposed to sacrifice yourself for the person you love. And it's your job to fix the person that you love's problems, to make her or him happy, to put them ahead of yourself each and every time. And if you're saying, well, yeah, tell me we should talk. And so in a sense, this grooms them to be attracted to the type of person who is going to hurt them, to replay that abuse, because that's what they know, that's what familiar, that's what they might not like the pain part of it, but that's what happened to them when they were kids. And so when they say they really want this stable, loving, healthy relationship, well, I think on some level, an unconscious level, they don't trust that that can really happen, or that they deserve it, or that they are worthy of it. So they choose individuals, whether they're strippers or teachers or nurses, but as long as they have this certain personality configuration that is exploitative and manipulative and abusive, they attract them and are attracted to them, and they replay all of that stuff. And many of them have had the opportunity to date attractive, healthy, intelligent women who aren't going to treat them like that, and they don't have an attraction for them. They find them boring. And that's because the healthy, stable women aren't reconstellating that what I would describe as an exquisite tension, where they're just about to get on that roller coaster again, and maybe it's going to be different this time. But of course, it never is.
No, matter of fact, in their lame pursuit of maybe it's going to be different again, they end up actually pursuing the guarantee that it's going to be the same again,
Exactly.
over and over and over. Let's put this on the idea of a continuum, because I mean, it's one thing we can focus on people in particular professions, but this is not limited to those professions. And now I'm going to go out on a limb and do some slut shaming here, which some people aren't going to like, but it needs to be said. There are women, and I think the incidence among them of personality disorders of different kinds is very high. When I see a woman who always dresses in a highly suggestive sexual way, when the clothes she wears are like painted on, and when there's lots of cleavage exposed, and when it's obvious that she is a walking advertisement of sexual availability, that's like dating a prostitute or a stripper. That if that's the way she views her body, is to advertise her sexual availability and to give her selection and have men coming to her offering things and trying to get her attention, that is precisely the same thing. Now, am I wrong about that, Dr. T?
Okay, I agree with you to a certain point, and then we diverge. Not all women who dress provocatively are looking for sex or advertising for sex. I think many of them are just looking for attention. It does not necessarily, they're not telegraphed, they're not saying, hey, I'm sexually available. They just know that that's what's going to get them attention. And so they do that. Some are, but I think a great many of them are not. And there are also women who are incredibly promiscuous, who dress rather slovenly in baggy clothes that, you know, like they look like elementary school teachers circa 1985. They have no fashion sense. They're not wearing anything really revealing or risque. So I think if you see somebody who's always, you know, pushed up bra to here, super heavy makeup, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are promiscuous, but it means that they're attention seekers, which isn't.
No, that's essentially what I was saying. I wasn't inferring that they were actually looking for sex every time they walked out the door. What I'm inferring is that they view themselves in terms of their sexual appeal. They do it to get attention. It does happen to have the side effect of creating more sexual selection for them, which they may or may not choose.
Right.
But in the end, the chances of that individual being some sort of personality disorder or high maintenance, high conflict type individual, to me, my experience has been much greater than women who dress a little more conservatively and with a little more decorum.
Well, exactly. But I mean, what we're talking about is somebody who is a chronic attention seeker, and that
so,
is
yeah,
a problem.
that is kind of a hint.
The attention of just one person is probably not going to be enough. And you will have to stand there and hold her handbag while she goes out and struts her stuff and gets attention from other people because her ego requires that.
And, you know, sometimes I've had the urge in dealing with men, because you can see it all the time. If a woman walks by in a very short, super tight skirt and something over, some sort of top that's very revealing, and she walks by, guys will go, oh man, hey, look at that, ooh wee, get a load of that. And my temptation there is to always point out, you know, there's a lot of women with great bodies and you don't see them because they're underneath clothes that don't make them look like whores. And so I still see that men have this weakness for that. Unfortunately, that's what they're going to chase in a lot of cases.
Natural for anyone, men or women, to appreciate a beautiful face, a beautiful physical form. I mean, you should have read the comments on a Facebook book I belong to when a power line went down on my street a couple of weeks ago and 2 truckloads of firemen showed up. I'm like, they're not dressed like the calendars, you know. Shirts on and there are no hoses. Well, they were none cheap. Yeah, so, and honestly, I think some of that is natural. You know, not every man who ogles a beautiful woman in a tight skirt is going to actually pursue her or go after her, but you can be like, yeah, nice figure, nice face, beautiful. I mean, that's why we have.
Absolutely. I mean, but that was not exactly what I was talking about. I certainly, if I see a nice figure, I'm noticing it, and if I'm with an acquaintance, I might make a quiet remark about it. But I'm talking about the guys that are like, oh my God, and we'll talk for 10 minutes about the woman that walked by like they've never seen one before, and that does happen.
It does. But again, how many of them would actually run off and pursue that person? I think some of that is just guys thinking that's how they need to be guys, or like talking about sports, and who cares? I think most of the time that's relatively harmless. But to go back to our topic, I think the men who, as I mentioned earlier, there seem to be a couple of types of men who are attracted to the exotic dancers, etc. And those are the super nice guys who want to rescue her, who actually, in the end, require rescuing themselves. Then there are the narcissistic guys who are just looking for a trophy fuck, pardon my language, but that's what they're doing. And then there are the consenting adults who just like, hey, that's what they're into, and they're going to have fun, and they're not going to get serious about it. And if that's what you want to do, and you can protect yourself emotionally, that's great. Whatever consenting adults want to do, fine by me. But I'm talking about the guys who are actually seeking to have loving, healthy relationships with an individual who works in one of these fields. And it's so hard not to just, if they were front of me, I would have a hard time not shaking them. Like, what were you thinking? Of course this was how it was going to play out. And I have worked with men who they have lost their jobs because they are just so emotionally devastated by how they end up being treated, and the financial ruin, because except for the super wealthy ones who have done this, a lot of the guys I've worked with have gone almost broke. Basically, what ends up happening, and I mentioned this in the write-up for this evening's show, is they end up having to pay a stripper to keep her clothes on. I can appreciate the irony on one level, but this is really sad stuff. Because what eventually happens is, okay, well, I need money. You don't want me to dance, I need money. So, okay, you bought me the Coach bag, you're paying my rent, or they allow her to move in. I need money for this, I need money for that. Well, I don't have any more money. How about you go back to school? No, I'll have to start dancing again. So the threat is I'm going to go back to the pole or start hooking again or whatever their issue is. And these guys who, it's kind of the reverse of your non-professional gold digger where the man has to continue to pay her to have sex with him and take her clothes off, where in these situations the guy has to pay her to keep her clothes on and not have sex with other people.
And maybe some of them are looking for that. Let me ask you this from a little bit more bird's eye view, global perspective. We have established from the beginning, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it should be reiterated often. In those professions, whether it's hairdressing or prostitution or porn actresses or any other kind of sex worker, there are obviously going to be people that don't fit the mold of what we're talking about. There's going to be very calculated, rational women that figure they can make a lot of money at sex and retire early and be self-sufficient. That happens, and I wouldn't claim for a moment that it does not happen. And there are women, I know for a fact, that believe they have some sort of calling in that profession, that's what they're supposed to be doing, and they view it even as far as going as to say of somewhat of a spiritual act. And there are women that are like that. I mean, I don't know how many, but they're out there. So I don't want to take away from that. But
of course. But we're talking about, look, guys, and if you have encountered one of those women, that's wonderful. But what I'm bringing up are the men who are with women who don't have that view of it. It is mercy.
So what I'm trying to ask here, and I took a long way to get to it, is do you think it's fair to say from an overview that you would recommend to men to avoid women who are in those professions, keeping in mind that, I've got others. I wouldn't advise men to date psychotherapists. I wouldn't.
Neither would I.
Yeah, exactly. There are other professions where I would say, guy, I would go find somebody else.
Teachers, nurses. It's the Strict for Men Forum has a very informal, long-running poll, and the top 5 professions that many of the gentlemen whose wives and girlfriends, that they're participating there, are either nurses, teachers, mental health professionals. Those are the top 3. So yes, I agree with that. I would
and not a hooker in the group of them. So we're not just picking on this group.
There are a few, and but so of course, as you said, there are exceptions to this. But guys, if you want to test that out, pay attention. Is she asking you for money to pay her bills very early on? She needs you to rescue her, solve her problems. Oh, she needs a place to live because her roommate's just so mean. And yeah, you've only known her 2 weeks, but it's only temporary. It's only temporary. Use your head. Use this head.
The one that she's pointing at, folks.
This one. somebody who is independent, a sex worker who is independent, self-sufficient, got it together, doesn't need you to rescue her, doesn't need you to pay her bills, doesn't need you to move her in right away. So if that stuff is happening, you're about to get hosed. Big time.
Oh, another hint. If she's in a sex industry job where she's making $500 to $1,000 a day and she's broke,
yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, where's that going?
Yes, because it's going to be the same place your money's going to go. And you should be aware of that. So is it fair? We're saying don't date women in those professions as a rule.
I think as a general rule of thumb, if you are looking for a committed, monogamous, stable, loving relationship, it's probably best to avoid it. Again, I do not want to deny that there are exceptions to that. I'm just saying that the likelihood is greater that you're going to get hooked up with somebody who is damaged. But if you have that propensity anyway, you're likely to hook up with somebody who's really damaged and toxic, regardless of what profession they're in. I just think the likelihood is greater.
I do think one other thing needs to be said, though. If you have your choice between a crack whore and a gender studies professor, take the crack whore and her sister. Just saying.
Oh, my goodness. I'm not going to say that.
Well, you know it's true.
No comment.
Okay.
No comment.
That was a showstopper of a faux pas there, folks. I don't know if it was a faux pas. I think it was sound advice.
Well, the other thing, I know we're getting close to time, but the other caution I want to put out there, and this is something that you and I have collectively rolled our eyes at, and I'm going to lump this category in with all the others, mail order brides.
Now, I want to tell you before you start on that our multi-site operation, director of multi-site operations, Lucien Valsan, may have some disagreement there. He has dug into the research on it, and he has found it. He's not, believe me, I'm not going to mischaracterize what he said, but what he has said is that the marriages of people who marry from overseas actually turn out to average more longevity than domestic marriages. So
what's the level of satisfaction? So that there may be, well, you know what, all I know are the people who wash up into the shores of Shrink for Men, and those are not happy cases. So that very well may be true.
That very well may be true, but still, even as much as I respect Lucien, and I do, he really does actual research to study these things. Saying that you'll make it 3 years longer before you get wiped out into divorce court because your foreign wife was smart enough to wait for 10 years.
He's going to get more support if the marriage is longer, so maybe that's not such a good thing.
And maybe it's not such a gift. What I do know is that if you're searching around online for a Filipino wife because you think that non-Western women will somehow bring a set of values with them, remember, she's looking for a husband on the internet, guys, to take her to what I was stationed in Seoul, Korea for a year when I was in the service, and they had a term there called the Big PX. That's here, the United States. PX is for post exchange. It's the big store. And all the girls wanted to go, not all the girls, but many of the girls wanted to go to the Big PX. And that's what women on the internet, on websites looking for husbands are doing. Don't make any mistake about it. I had a cousin that did it, and 2 years after he brought her over from overseas, he was divorced, had lost everything, and she was right in the community of people of her nationality living a happy life on his money, all according to the plan she had before he ever brought her over. Your risk there is high.
Right. So, again, one of the running threads through all of this is that you need to really think twice about committing yourself to a person, legally binding yourself to a person, creating a child with a person who is willing to fake affection, attention, and have sex for money or other material goods, because you're talking about a person for whom emotion in relationships are transactional. That is mercenary and it is predatory. People who will play act for money, that's what they're going to do. They're going to play act for money, or for security, or physical safety, or whatever the resource is.
Play acting is play acting. What can you say? Well, look, Dr. T, we've gone over the 45-minute mark on our program. I guess we have addressed this is actually, it appears like a complicated subject, but it actually turns out to be quite simple. Common sense will take you a long way, and actually having your eyes open will take you even further. The trick is to keep your eyes open, and for some people that's very, very difficult.
Your eyes open and your wallet shut, because you know what? If you're not quick to come to their financial rescue, I'm going to guess they're going to lose interest in you pretty darn quick.
That was going to be, let me ask you first, because that reminded me of my final 2 cents on this matter, but let me ask you to go ahead if you have additional thoughts. Go ahead and say.
A lot more than 2 cents, Paul.
What's that?
It cost you a lot more than 2 cents.
Yes, that's true, but not tonight it won't.
No, not.
Look, what I see in a lot of this with men, especially with the broken bird, broken wing, and rescuing, is that these are men who do not believe in themselves, and they believe they must be able to rescue a woman in order to get a woman to love them. That's what I think is the core of the problem there, is that they don't
degrade themselves.
Yes.
In order to get a woman to love them, which of course, realistically, that doesn't mean, think about that objectively, it doesn't make sense.
And a lot of guys will tell you that they're going overseas to shop for a bride because they don't like Western women. And certainly nobody here is arguing with some of the difficulties in dealing with a lot of Western women, but I will still bet my bottom dollar that most of those guys are there for the same reason that guys are rescuing prostitutes. The same exact dynamics, the same psychology going on, the sense of inadequacy, the sense of not being good enough for a quote-unquote real relationship. And all I can say is, and this part is my final 2 cents, is that if you do want to be with someone, a lot of guys now are going MGTOW, they're not dating, and that's fine too. I think that's a really healthy response to modern culture. But if you want to be with somebody, but you also would like to hang on to your money and hang on to your property and hang on to your self-respect, the best way you can get there is by having self-respect.
Right.
And I mean completely and totally being willing to say no, being willing to say, I'm not your white knight. I can be your friend, I can be your partner, but I'm not here to rescue you. I'm not here to take care of things that you need to be taking care of yourself. And a lot of guys just won't face that with a woman because they fear the rejection. And until you're willing to fear, go ahead.
A lot of the guys I work with, when we get to this level, they don't think that they have anything to offer. to a healthy, stable woman. And that's the real issue, because when they're going after the broken ones, on some level they know they're a certain degree healthier. But they also, because their identity in a relationship anyway for so long has been that of the rescuer, the doormat, the fixer, the people pleaser. They don't know anything else, and it feels really, really uncomfortable when a woman is like, I don't need you to save me. I don't need you to rescue me. I like you for you. You don't have to pay my bills. You don't have to text me 30 times a day. You don't have to support me financially. I don't need you to come in and fix all my problems. I can handle that. And that's really uncomfortable for them, because sadly their belief is, well, if you don't need me for those things, then what do you see in me?
Yes, guys, if you think that you are so worthless and have so little to offer that you are willing to settle for a woman whose greatest job skill is picking up folded dollar bills off a dirty floor with her ass cheeks, then you need to work on your self-esteem a great deal. I would suggest starting out, one of the best boosters of self-esteem is to reject stuff that's not supposed to be acceptable. Hard to get that message across, but fact of the matter is that it's true. And that's all I got. Anything else, Dr. T?
Yes, and if you really, really, really must rescue, must come to the rescue, rescue a dog.
Hey, yeah.
She's not going to rip you off. Well, maybe she'll take your pork chop off the dinner table if you turn your back, but that's better than your life savings, isn't it? Yes, it is. Okay, go back to sleep.
Well, I tell you what, remember, dogs are good. Everybody have a good night. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.